Now, we're going back to 1 Samuel and the life of David again. Now, if you can remember, last time we were with David, at the end of chapter 26, what had happened? David had just spared Saul's life for the second time. And David had come to some kind of an agreement with Saul, we find. Because if we start at the end of chapter 26, verse 22, David gives Saul back his spear, and one of the young men comes over and collects it. And then, verse 25, Saul says to David, "May you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things and still prevail." So David goes on his way and Saul returns to his place. So they come to some kind of temporary agreement, at least where Saul doesn't try to kill David. But it doesn't seem to last, and David doesn't trust him very much. Because what's the first thing we find at the beginning of chapter 27? David says in his heart, "Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul." So let's read through the first 7 verses of chapter 27 and see what this state of mind leads to. David says in his heart, "Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me, to seek any more in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand." So David arose and went over with the 600 men who were with him to Achish the son of Maok, king of Gath. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. So David said to Achish, "If I have now found favour in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?" So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. Now the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. So there is nothing better for me than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. I mean, from a human perspective, you can see David's point of view here. He suspected that Saul would be hunting him again fairly soon. He knew from past experience that there were plenty of people in Israel only too willing to surrender him. So David doesn't waste any time here. He gathers up the whole band who were with him, 600 men, and went and lived with the Philistines. And the plan works. Saul doesn't look for David anymore. But we know that this has happened before, hasn't it? This isn't the first time David's tried to escape from Saul by fleeing back to the Philistines in Gath. I mean, back in chapter 21, we found him doing exactly the same thing. And on that occasion, David had to feign madness before running and escaping from Achish. And to get him back into the land of Judah, it took a visit from the prophet Gad. So why did David run back to Gath this time? I mean, at this point in his career, he should have been confident and trusting God. He was the anointed king of Israel. He had God's promise that he would take the throne. And we've just been reading the end of chapter 26, that God has preserved his life again when Saul had been chasing him. I mean, God had enabled David to enter the very camp of Saul and take away the king's spear and his water jug. So with these events in his immediate past, David should have been very confident of the Lord's provision for his future, and yet he wasn't. He didn't trust God to take care of him. He ran away and tried to provide for himself by his own efforts. And as we find out, this is going to get him into serious trouble. But before we're too hard on David at this point, let's remember that he's acting in exactly the same way that we often do. I mean, we too have promises from God. Promises of his provision and his care for us. Promises that he's working out his purposes in our lives and in the society around us. I mean, we know all this, but so often we can look at our lives and we can look at the circumstances around us, we can look at the way the country's going, and we forget these things. We all have these moments of doubt, times of insecurity when we feel very much alone. We can feel as though we're called to fight these battles by ourselves. And at times like this, we can do exactly what David did. We fall back on our circumstances and what we know from past experience. And what we know is the obvious thing to do. And we don't ask the Lord. David had run away to Gath in the past. And he got him away from Saul. So, in moments of doubt, he tries to do it again. And the result, immediate result at least, was good. David gets everything he wants. He gets away from Saul. I mean, last time he met Achish, he was driven out of his presence as a madman. But now, the rift between David and Saul is public knowledge, and David is well treated by Achish. He even gets his own city to live in, far away from the king. He gets freedom of movement. I mean, everything is going well for David at this point. He could seem to be in a good place, and yet spiritually he's very far from where he should be, and he's about to get caught out. So if we read on for a moment from verses 8 to 12. David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites and the Amalekites. For those nations were the inhabitants of the land from old, as you go to Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. Whenever David attacked the land, he left neither man nor woman alive, but took away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. Then Achish would say, "Where have you made a raid today?" And David would say, "Against the southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the Jemuelites, or against the southern area of the Kenites." And David would say, "Neither man or woman alive to bring news to Gath, lest they should inform on us." Thus David did, and thus was his behaviour in all the time he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, "He has made his people Israel utterly abhor him, therefore he will be my servant forever." So to maintain his position in the eyes of the king of Gath, David has to make him believe that he's switched sides. So David goes out and he raids the neighbouring tribes. And then he comes home and tells Achish he's been attacking Judah. And in order to conceal his true actions, he has to make sure that he leaves not a single person alive to tell to Achish what's actually happened. He's living this double life. And this can happen to us too, can't it? We think we're doing all right, but in reality we are living a kind of double life. We come to church and we present one face to people, but out in the world we're living far differently. And that can't go on. That is not going to last, is it? In David's case, the comfortable life he'd been enjoying with Achish was about to be completely shattered. Now, beginning of chapter 28, we find the Philistines gathered their armies for war to fight with Israel. And Achish says to David, "You know you will assuredly go out with me to the battle, you and your men." Now, it's got to be a bit of a shock to David, hasn't it? All this time he's been pretending to attack Israel, but he's been invading the neighbouring tribes instead. But now, he's actually got to make a decision, hasn't he? So David says to Achish, "Surely you know what your servant can do." And Achish says to David, "Therefore I will make you one of my chief guardians forever." Now David should have suspected this day was going to come. I mean, the Philistines have been enemies of Israel for a long time. And now, living with the Philistines, he's got to side publicly with the Philistines against his own country. And everyone's going to see what side he really favoured. David's got a decision to make. And there is no way he can easily escape from this. So what's he going to do? Well, in chapter 29 we find out. The Philistines gather their armies and prepare for battle. And verse 3 of chapter 29, the princes of the Philistines say, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish says to the princes of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me these days or these years? And to this day I found no fault in him since he defected to me." Now you can see why the Philistines weren't very happy about this. I mean, if they're going into war against Israel, and they've got one of the chief servants of the king of Israel fighting alongside them, I mean, they're going to assume that he's going to turn in the battle against them, aren't they? But Achish seems to believe David. And he does seem to be a little bit gullible at this point, doesn't he? I mean, you can see the Philistines' point of view, but Achish is committed to David and wants him in the battle, though we suspect David would much rather prefer not to be there. But the princes of the Philistines insist. They say, "Make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place you have appointed to him. And do not let him go down with us to the battle, lest in the battle he could become our adversary. For with what could he reconcile himself to his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to one to another in dances, saying, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So much to David's relief, presumably, Achish calls David and says to him, "Surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my sight. For to this day I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, the Lords do not favour you. Therefore return now and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." Now, at this point, David turns to Achish and says, "But what have I done? And to this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I've been with you, that I may not go in and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" I mean, David is being a little bit disingenuous here, because he doesn't want to go and fight, does he? And yet he has to put up a good act. I mean, but so, in the end, David and his men, verse 11, get up early in the morning and they depart to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines go up to Jezreel. See, but what David couldn't have known at this point was this was to be the final battle that would end Saul's reign. It is here that David would begin to ascend the throne of Israel. I mean, ever since being anointed king, the one thing David has been consistent about is preserving Saul's life. At every opportunity he's had to kill Saul, he's refused to do so, insisting that Saul's end should be left to the Lord. And yet now, through his own sinful actions, David finds himself almost going into the battle on the side of those who were going to kill Saul. I mean, David probably never imagined such a scenario, but by trying to act alone, using his own methods, he has put himself in a situation that he should never have been in. And he's only saved from this, not by his own actions, but by the actions of the pagan Philistines. I mean, God here overrules the situation. He uses the wicked pagan rulers to keep the supposedly righteous David from further sin. And David returns to Ziklag, where further trouble awaits him. But that's something we'll see on another evening. Now, despite what we've seen so far, David was a child of God. And we see God here caring for him, providing for him. And David is eventually, in the not too distant future, going to be restored to a closer walk with God. We know that David did care deeply about God's purposes for Israel. And even though he sometimes adopted the wrong methods to accomplish them, he is on God's side here. And he he will soon be walking close to God again. But there's another character in our story, isn't there? David ran away from Gath to escape from Saul. So what has Saul been doing while David's been away? Well, that's the bit we missed out in chapter 28. So if we read chapter 28, verses 1 to 7, let's start at verse 3. We've read the first bit. Chapter 28, verse 3. So Samuel had died, and all Israel lamented for him and buried him in Ramah, in his own city. Now Saul had put the mediums and spiritists out of the land, and the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped at Shunem. So Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." So Saul is presented here as almost the exact opposite of David. David ran away and didn't inquire for guidance from the Lord. But Saul in this chapter is suddenly desperate to inquire of the Lord and find out what is about to happen. David tried to do the right thing using the wrong methods, while Saul is now seen doing the wrong thing, but trying to inquire of the Lord while he's doing it. Now, at the start of this chapter, we were told that Saul had removed all the mediums from the land. And that's almost the last positive thing we read about Saul. It was a command of the Lord that all these mediums should be removed from the land, and Saul was doing the right thing when he removed them. But he doesn't seem to have been very thorough about it, and when the occasion arises, he's only too willing to visit a medium, and everyone in his own court knows exactly where to find one. So he seems to have been rather half-hearted in his obedience, doesn't he? So let's read on from verse 8 to 11 and we'll see what happened. Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes, and he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, "Please conduct a seance for me, and bring up the one I shall name to you." And the woman said to him, "Look, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life, and cause me to die?" And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." And the woman said, "Who shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." So Saul visits the medium in disguise, asks her to bring up Samuel. Now, we don't know why he thought Samuel would talk to him. Samuel has been avoiding him for quite some time. I mean, there's no record of him trying to see Samuel before. I mean, there are times when he would have benefited from Samuel's guidance, but he'd forfeited that through disobedience. Samuel hadn't seen him since the time Saul had spared the life of Agag. And now when it's too late, he tries finally to seek out Samuel once more, but in a way that was expressly forbidden by the Lord. Now what happens next is somewhat debated. This is the last appearance of Samuel in the book. But in verse 12, the woman sees Samuel, and she immediately cries out. And also at this point, she also recognises Saul for who he is, although we're not told how. The woman sees Samuel, she cries out with a loud voice, and she spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me, for you are Saul?" And the king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What did you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I saw a spirit descending out of the earth." And he said to her, "What is his form?" And she said, "An old man who is coming up. He's dressed with a mantle." And Saul perceived that it was Samuel. And he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. So what happens? Samuel tells Saul what is going to happen in the battle. And it isn't good news, is it? Because Samuel says, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul says, I'm deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me. And God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by the prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I've called you, that you may reveal to me what I should do. And Samuel says, why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbour David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel from you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be here with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground and was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel. So imagine the position of Saul at this point. Here is a man with no hope left anywhere. He's told he will lose the battle. He is told that he and his sons will die. He has no eternal hope. Not only has he been rejected as king of Israel, but verse 16 tells us the Lord was his enemy. So no hope in this life, no hope in the next life. And what a contrast we see here with David. Saul started out very well as a king, but his heart was not right, and he was rejected. We've seen in this chapter David makes mistakes too, but ultimately he returns to the Lord. So what makes a difference? Neither of those two men is perfect, but one sets his heart on the things of God, and the other is happy to serve God when it suits him, but it's only a show, an outward pretense. His heart is never right with the Lord. I mean, we'll see later on another day, in chapter 30, where David ultimately returns to the Lord. I mean, chapter 30, verse 6, we're told David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So David would return. He would remind himself of God's promises concerning him. If we flip back to chapter 23 for a moment. Chapter 23, and we look at verses 16 and 17. Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God, and told him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that. So in chapter 23, it was Jonathan coming to David and strengthening him. But back in Ziklag, while the Philistines went to battle, what could David do but strengthen himself? So as David can strengthen himself in the Lord, we can follow his example, can't we? Because there are many occasions we can remind ourselves of the promises we have from the Lord. So what promises do we have? Well, God has promised never to abandon us. He's promised to be a refuge for us. He has promised us eternal glory. He's promised that his kingdom will grow and expand on this earth. He's promised to judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous. We have exactly the same promises that David had. So we have greater promises, don't we? So how can we do less than David did? I mean, I think this attitude to Christian living is best summed up in David's own words. I mean, let's read that Psalm 16. This is where it finds, well, it's David's attitude to life, but it finds its ultimate fulfilment in the Messiah's victory over Satan and death and hell. So Psalm 16. Preserve me, O Lord, for I put my trust in you. O my soul, you've said to the Lord, you are my Lord. My goodness is nothing apart from you. As for the saints who are on the earth, They are the excellent ones in whom is my delight. Their sorrows shall be multiplied who hasten after another god. Their drink offerings of blood I will not offer, nor take up their names on my lips. O Lord, you are my portion and my cup, my portion, my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. The lions have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I will bless the Lord who's given me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night seasons. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is my right hand, I will not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures for evermore. So it was by making the Lord his inheritance that David was able to trust him to take care of him. I mean, David would fail again on many occasions throughout his life. But ultimately it was the Lord that preserved him. It was the Lord who was his inheritance. And the contrast here is with Saul, who chose to focus on the immediate good now. Saul served the Lord when it was convenient, and when it was not, he did what best suited him. And by doing so, finally he lost both his life and any hope of eternal salvation. So let's be like David here. We'll leave it there. And now, before we come to prayer, we're going to sing again. We're going to sing number 846. 846.